Recently, an argument was had on the internet about Nami's future in One Piece, where one user said that, if One Piece ends with Nami married to a man and pregnant, I am actually gonna bury myself in the ground. And that, I think rather predictably, started a, how shall we say, vigorous internet discussion, and it got me thinking. Something very odd and very interesting has happened with Nami over the course of One Piece, where she has gone from the freedom-loving dream chaser destined to spend her life traveling around the world to draw a map of the planet, to a distinctly maternal figure whose post-time skip plot mainly revolves around her relationship with children, to the point where Nami hasn't even mentioned her dream at all post-time skip, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I'm mostly here to tell you exactly how, and more importantly, why this change was made. And we are going to use it to predict how Nami's story is going to conclude at the very end of One Piece. However, at the very beginning of the One Piece, following her own personal liberation from Arlong, Oda shifted Nami's focus to sharing that gift with other young women. And the rest of pre-time skip Nami's story can largely be summarized by Nami's saga sisters. The first of which is Nefertari Vivi. Nami feels sympathy for a lot of characters that the Straw Hats cross paths with, but Vivi is our first fully explored example of how Nami acts when she feels empathy. Nami felt Vivi's suffering and she was determined to do anything to alleviate it. And one of the key scenes that always sticks out in my mind is right after the bomb explodes, and both sides of the Alabasta Civil War, they're like, what the crap was that? And then they start killing each other again. In this moment, Vivi desperately tries to yell out, stop the fighting, and even though this isn't Nami's country, they're not her people, Nami feels Vivi's pain, and Nami is the one who tearfully and aggressively orders the rest of the crew to do everything they can to save as many people as possible for the sake of Vivi. During the Alabasta arc, Vivi became the closest thing that Nami had to a sister since leaving Nojiko at Kokiyashi Village. And this arc of sisterhood would continue after leaving Vivi on Alabasta, with Nami rather comedically claiming Robin as her sister, after Robin gave her some of Crocodile's gems. But here's the thing though, it started out as a hollow title for comedy, but that is the relationship that Nami and Robin would go on to develop as well, with all of the same empathetic tendencies and beats that we saw with Vivi. Although oddly enough, I think the strongest example of Nami's sisterhood comes from Thriller Bark, where she befriended Lola Zombie and Lola herself. The zombie Lola originally attacked Nami because Absalom was interested in her, but Nami almost instantly convinced zombie Lola to become her friend. Then they started chatting about boys, partly due to Nami claiming to be a man at the time, but mostly to give advice on how zombie Lola could force Absalom into marrying her. It's a strangely sweet relationship, and one that was unbreakable once formed. Because even though zombie Lola knew that Nami was lying, Nami is not a man, and that Absalom, her love, was infatuated with Nami, zombie Lola still pulled through to save Nami from Absalom, not because of her desire to marry him, but because of how highly she valued this sisterhood that she'd formed with Nami. And when Absalom injures zombie Lola, Nami puts on quite possibly the most serious and terrifying face that she's ever made in the entire series, and she mercilessly finishes Absalom for hurting her friend. And 1 arc later, we would meet yet another sister friend, which would be Kami. Nami took to her just as quickly as every other young woman the Straw Hats meet pre-time skip, and it was Nami who felt the most responsibility for rescuing Kami from the human auction house because she could empathize with her after effectively having gone through an entire childhood of slavery under Arlong. All of which is to say that Nami, for the most part, has a very clear role in almost every pre-time skip One Piece saga. And it's a role that generally involves supporting and bonding with whoever the young woman of that particular saga is. Whether that's Vivi, Robin, Lola, or Kami, Nami forms a unique sisterly relationship with them and is determined to support their liberty, their dreams, and their ambitions, to give them the same gift that she was given by Luffy. And other than money, I would go so far as to say that it's Nami's most identifiable trait after the Arlong arc, which is why it's so jarring to think that has almost completely disappeared post-time skip. There's a little bit of it here and there, like Nami becoming friends with Carrot, although I'd argue that Chopper takes the primary role in Carrot-related friendships, and also a bit with Shirahoshi, like right at the end of Fishman Island, and even a tiny bit with Charlotte Chiffon through that Lola connection. But the sisterly Nami of pre-time skip doesn't really exist post-time skip, and what has now filled that void is maternal Nami. The most potent example being Punk Hazard, where Sanji suggests leaving the children they find in Caesar's lab for very admittedly logical reasons, which saw Nami iconically replying, "You're right, Sanji, but these children are crying to us for help. How can we possibly turn our backs on them?" And that one line almost entirely defines post-time skip Nami. Her plot threads, no matter how big or small, when she does get them. She doesn't always, but when she does, they tend to tie into Nami's maternal instincts. And in a way, I think this makes a lot of sense because Nami is now growing and taking on the role of her inspiration Belle-Mère. And in the same way that Belle-Mère didn't ignore baby Nami crying for help on the battlefield, Nami now refuses to ignore any child crying for help. And to be clear, this isn't an exclusively post-time skip feature. This maternal nature was present pre-time skip as well. I think that could be best seen with Isa during Skypiea, but that is quite a rare example of what has become a very common post-time skip, with Nami becoming something of a dedicated carer for the sagas that she's relevant in, such as with the Punk Hazard children, Momonosuke, Tama, Bonnie, and as I'm writing this on Elbaf, Nami's main goal is to save the children being controlled by the Holy Knights. Post-time skip also happens to be when Oda started answering questions about the Straw Hats in real life, and in the SBS of Volume 76, Oda said that Nami would be a preschool teacher, which even though this is an SBS answer, I find quite enlightening because I seriously doubt that this is how Oda would have responded pre-time skip. Because the answer for what would Nami do if she wasn't a pirate, it seems pretty obvious. If Oda was answering this question pre-time skip, surely Nami would have become a cartographer or a weather scientist or some other job adjacent to those fields. Because weather and maps, they were her supreme talent and at the time her supreme passion. However, Nami's post-time skip passion, as identified by Oda, is childcare. Being a preschool teacher is what Nami would now want to do rather than pursue her pre-time skip interest in cartography. And we're at the point now where I'm not even sure if Nami has said the word map post-time skip. I mean, she probably has, but it's just the fact that I can't think of a key moment off the top of my head that's very telling. Whereas I can talk into infinity about the amount of times that she has been shown caring for children. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing at all. Again, I'm just saying that this is what Nami is now. Even in her most recent saga climax, Nami was mainly fighting Ulti to protect Tama. And she even goes on to make an alliance with Big Mom, the very grotesque incarnation of motherhood itself, to defeat Ulti. And if you want to know just how deep the maternal theme goes in this fight, then I have a whole video covering it. But Oda is no longer writing Nami as a character geared towards sisterhood. And you can tell because the Vivis, Robins, Zolas, and Kamis, those sorts of characters do still exist post-time skip in the form of Shirahoshi, Rebecca, Pudding, and Hiyori, all of which have very limited, if any, interaction with Nami during their respective arcs. The one exception to this so far would be Jewelry Bonnie, but I guarantee you she's only an exception because in reality she's 12 years old, so she's a child and that plays into Nami's new focus. And I think the reason for this shift is quite simple, and it's something that I've pointed out on this channel many times, but it's a reflection of Oda's changing priorities as he himself matures. When One Piece began serialization, Oda was 22 years old, so he was in the same generation as the characters in the East Blue 5. He was a young author who was setting out to chase an unimaginable dream to create this story, and his characters were given equally as massive dreams, along with the drive and determination needed to attain them. Oda was a rookie in the manga world, making waves and gradually gaining more and more recognition in tandem with the Straw Hats causing bigger and bigger incidents. But as the series went on, time passed a lot faster for Oda than it did for the Straw Hats, who are all now 2 years older since the beginning of the series in 1997, but Eiichiro Oda himself is now 28 years older. In fact, Oda is now almost exactly Goldie Roger's age when he was executed. And the way I would describe his writing from pre to post time skip is that he started out writing as Luffy and has now evolved into writing like Roger. And different parts of One Piece take place at different points within Oda's own personal journey. And a character like Nami serves as a pretty fantastic way to track those changes. In many ways, it can be a mistake to view Nami as a 20-year-old woman. Yes, she canonically is in One Piece, but she is being written by a 50-year-old man. And her role as a protagonist is designed to reflect his values, a core one of which has become parenthood. Over the course of One Piece, Eiichiro Oda has had 2 daughters that he talks about quite a bit, and they have influenced some pretty major events in the manga that we've covered in other videos. And it's clear that Oda no longer sees his life as purely for his own personal pursuit. It's not just about his dreams anymore, because in many ways, Oda has already achieved his equivalent of becoming the Pirate King in the real world. He's an author who is only 9 places away from William Shakespeare as one of the best-selling in human history. And now Oda's focus seems to be less on drive and dreams and more on ideas of belonging and legacy. Because it's not just Nami. We can see this change reflected in most Straw Hats, the easiest example of which is Sanji. Mr. Cookman had his dream to find the All Blue, as well as his passion to make delicious tasties, but almost all of his post-time skip character has been geared towards exploring the idea of family and belonging, with a very strong focus on what it means to be a good and bad father, using the contrast of Zeph versus Judge. a topic that comes up fairly frequently post-time skip and is clearly very important to Oda, likely because being a good father as a father is something that he thinks about quite a bit as well. And even in the very current story on Elbaf, we still have yet to dive into the specifics of this, but at the time of this recording, Oda has implied that Brook may be Gunko's father. Whether that's biological or not, that is the direction we seem to be heading down once more after doing it with Sanji, and also after having extensively explored the concept of fatherhood significantly more recently with Kuma and Bonnie. But some Straw Hats have remained more consistent. Luffy is a man who has to stay focused regardless of Oda's changing priorities. But what Oda's done instead is change how characters interact with Luffy. For example, let's take Rebecca. Her story with Luffy is all about being able to live with her father Kyros and Luffy facilitating that. And Oda's made a more concerted effort to introduce far more child characters into arcs that directly interact with and are inspired by Luffy. Really smacking us on the behinds with the bat of emphasis of how Luffy is shaping the dreams and will of the next generation, which he's definitely been doing the whole time, but there's now less of a focus on Luffy's personal journey and it's more about the impact that he's having on the world and the next generation. And something that we should certainly not leave out in regards to Nami specifically is Oda being inspired by his wife Chiaki Inaba, who Oda met while she was playing the role of Nami at a Jump Festa event. And I don't think it's out of the question to say that Oda's views on Nami have changed in direct correlation with Oda experiencing his own personal Nami embrace motherhood. Not to say that Oda views his wife as his character, but she was cast to play Nami, and mate, she was cast for a reason, and there's even speculation that many of Nami's outfits and poses have been based on Chiaki Inaba's previous modeling work. And look, I'm not hugely certain how much I buy into that. Some inspirations look a lot stronger than others. I think some are definitely reaching. But regardless, I do believe the way that Oda now writes Nami with her fierce care of children is partially inspired by his wife's experience as a mother, and that all of these post-time skip Nami moments of childcare are small letters of appreciation to his wife. Oda got married in 2004, and at the time he made a promise to his then new wife that when One Piece ended they would go on a trip around the world together. And for context, 2004 was when Long Ring Longland and the beginning of Water 7 were being published in the manga, so they've been waiting quite a while for that promised trip, but that also plays into Nami's evolution as well. Back then, Oda was in a very pre-time skip Nami position, where he was looking forward to this grand dream of traveling the entire world, which happens to be exactly what Nami wants to do by making a map of the planet. However, along the way, other things have taken priority over that desire, one of the major ones being parenthood, which is why both Oda and Nami now have a much greater focus on that than Nami's original dreams and ambitions. And to illustrate this further, here's a fun thought experiment. Do you, person watching man on the internet, do you think that pre-time skip Nami would have been used the same way that post-time skip Nami has? I personally don't. And if Oda was writing post-time skip Nami like he wrote pre-time skip, then I think one of the following two things would have happened. The first is that I think it's very possible that Oda would have kept Nami on Dressrosa instead of sending her to Zou, and the reason why would be to form a bond with Rebecca. I think the pre-time skip Nami's role would have seen her naturally leaning into the support of Rebecca, which is a function that still exists as part of the Dressrosa arc, but it was a job given to Robin instead. Robin takes to Rebecca more quickly than any other character we've seen, to the point where Robin's whole arc during Dressrosa becomes almost solely focused on protecting Rebecca as if she were Robin's younger sister, which is the exact thing that Nami used to do pre-time skip. Although with Robin, I always found it a little bit off because Rebecca and Robin, they're drawn on the same page quite a fair bit, but they only actually have 2 interactions before Robin goes into full older sister mode, and they're both entirely practical and logistical interactions as well. I think the idea is that Robin this whole time has been overhearing Rebecca's story, and as the chapters go on, Robin is empathizing with it. But I do think it would have been nice for Oda to actually draw that relationship forming instead of just telling us that it was there, like he did for Nami and Vivi, Nami and Robin, Nami and Lola, etc. In fact, their relationship is so undefined that the One Piece wiki page for Rebecca doesn't even list Robin as one of her friends, which I find pretty wild, but I can't really fault them because it is a very one-sided relationship, with Robin eagerly ready to die for Rebecca, whilst Rebecca is probably struggling to remember Robin's name. And I do think this feels extra weird because it was Robin who was put in this role and not Nami. It's a bit more out of character for Robin, or at least it was at the time that Dressrosa was being published. Robin is also another character who has leaned more maternal over time, but I think we just needed more time dedicated to that relationship. Whereas pre-time skip Nami was the kind of person who could instantly bond with any young woman in trouble and sacrifice her usual monetary motivation to assist them. And if Oda hadn't shifted Nami's Nami's focus in that more maternal direction, then I think she probably gets left on Dressrosa to have that arc with Rebecca, whilst Robin moves onward to Zoe. However, should Nami have been kicked off Dressrosa regardless, I then feel like Oda would have at least given Nami some sort of relationship with Charlotte Pudding on Whole Cake Island. Pudding herself was actually in an extremely Nami-esque situation. Big Mom was Pudding's Arlong. Pudding disgusted her mother because of her third eye, and was only kept around because Pudding was seen as a technical necessity for Big Mom's ambitions in the same way that Arlong kept Nami under his command for her technical necessity. Pudding and Nami, these two characters on paper seem almost purposely engineered to have a sisterly dynamic, especially because this is a big arc about biological family versus found family. But that's not where Oda's focus is anymore. Instead, a lot of that focus went to Sanji's family and his relationship with his parents and siblings. And in the absence of any children to protect during Whole Cake Island, honestly, Nami doesn't get a whole lot to do. Which brings me to what was being argued about on the internet, our end of series vision of Nami. I will agree so far as I can't see Nami getting actually pregnant or settling down with someone in the standard shonen way. However, motherhood is the main idea that Oda has been exploring with Nami for the past almost 20 years now, and she will likely end up going full Belle-Mère and either adopting children or taking it a step further and running her own orphanage, like a good version of what Mother Carmel was doing. With that said, Nami will definitely complete her map of the world, which is something that I haven't spoken about a lot in this video, mostly because Oda himself never really speaks about it anymore either. Regardless, Oda is not going to deprive Nami of her original dream, but our final vision of Nami is probably going to be more along the lines of Belle-Mère, a loving mother who dedicates her life to preventing children from having to suffer through the same hell that she did.